Mining Minute. I'm your host, Teresa Longo. I'm joined here this week by KWG Resources CEO, Frank Smink. Hi, Frank.
Hi, Teresa.
We're answering viewer questions here this week. Question this week is, when can we expect any news regarding the natural gas reduction process patent? And what is KWG Resources doing to protect that patent?
Very good question. You can only use the gas reduction process where you have natural gas. This is the fascinating thing about the discovery of the chromiting, the Ring of Fire discovery in Canada, and very, very, very large intrusion deposit of high-grade chromite. So we've got a confluence of discovery of wealth, if you will, in the natural gas on the one hand, and North America is totally interconnected with pipelines, gathering system, and so on. So wherever we create a gas reduction plant, we can bring gas to it in quantities that are needed at a very, very, very low price. And probably for the century and beyond, that we expect the Ring of Fire to be able to produce chrome. So that's the fortuitous accident. Years ago in Finland, when the Finns created Outokumpu, they spent a lot of time and money looking at this opportunity as well, and they decided, since the gas was not in Finland but in Russia, they'd be better off not going down that road at the end of the day. In South Africa, where there's a lot of chrome and where most of the world's chrome has come from over these last many decades, they have no natural gas to speak of. So they don't have the blessings that we do here in Canada with these two things being discovered at the same time. So that was the reason for patenting it. I guess it's also the best way of protecting it. Natural gas in other parts of the world is much more costly than it is in North America, where it is available. It's not available everywhere, and it's certainly not available at low prices in the other parts of the world where there's chrome. And so that's kind of our built-in protection. The patent application itself is a legal process. We're prosecuting it. We originally made application in 8 countries. These are the 8 principal places where either stainless steel is made or chrome is produced, or some aspect of the business is undertaken. And we're now down to 7. We looked at earlier work that had been done in China and the cost of maintaining a patent in China and the fact that China has no natural gas. So we decided we would drop the application for a patent in China, and we continue to prosecute in the other places: Indonesia, Japan, USA, Kazakhstan, Turkey. So that'll be ongoing. At the end of the day, there's a patent granted, a license, and that may be in all 7 of the remaining cases many months, if not years away. There's no news to be made of it one way or another. While we go through the legal steps, we are continuing to look for opportunities to develop the process and commercialize it. And so that will be the news. That is the next news. We're looking for an opportunity in another country where there may be where there is an industry in this space, and where the government has some enthusiasm to assist in the development in the commercialization of the process. So.
Frank, recently you gave a speech mentioning an application for funds for infrastructure had not yet been submitted. Fast forward to today, we've got announcements for federal government budgetary funds for Indigenous people and infrastructure development money. So, has there been an application made?
The chairman of the Northern Caucus, Mark Saray, famously said a few days ago, the province has no plan yet. I mean, that's one man's view. That's perhaps a bit uncharitable. There's no application to the federal government based on a development plan. I'm not party to the conversations between the provincial government and the federal government, but I guess it's fair comment in the sense that the province has no plan to lay before the federal government with respect to development of the Ring of Fire, or the infrastructure to assist that development. I think industry is and the First Nations are very close to the point of being able to agree on what development scenarios might look like. And that being done, then I think a plan can develop. Part and parcel of such a plan, and I guess really the most important part of it, is that we have to confirm that there is a market. There's a lot of stainless steel being made in the world, and we're in the, I think, late stages of those kinds of conversations. I'm hopeful that the First Nations that are directly impacted, the Martin Falls and Webequie First Nations, it would be their traditional territories that road or railroad would pass through. I'm hopeful that they're in a position to now participate in those conversations with the people in those parts of the world where the stainless steel is made. So that's principally, as we've spoken about before, China, for about 2/3 of it. So then a plan can be developed, and that would be shared quite rapidly with the federal government in particular.
Joined here this week by special guest, Nipissing MPP, Vic Fedeli. Thanks for joining us, Vic.
Always a pleasure, Teresa.
Vic has been a fierce supporter and advocate for Ontario's North through recent budget recommendations to the Liberal government. Now, Mr. Fedeli, what are the latest developments from Queen's Park regarding Ontario's Ring of Fire?
Well, first of all, the government did not take any of our recommendations, but what was even worse was the fact that they have reduced the Ministry of Northern Development and Mines budget by $70 million. You can go back to 2014 even, where the budget was more than $800 million. Today it's in the 700 million and change. So it's been reduced even from where it was years ago. And the Ring of Fire, although was put in the budget in 2014, $1 billion for transportation, it was repeated in 15, repeated in 16. It's gone from the budget. So we're very concerned, of course, that they're trying to artificially balance the budget on the backs of those men and women in the North.
And what do you think has to happen, Mr. Fedeli, for this to be reversed, for the Liberal government to take notice and to take action to include this in their budget going forward?
I'm not sure where the Premier stands on the Ring of Fire. I've asked a question in the legislature. MPP Norm Miller has asked a question in the legislature. Premier, tell us how you're going to ignite the growth and development in the Ring of Fire and create the jobs. And instead of a solid answer, the Premier always says, well, when I was canoeing on the Attawapiskat River, I saw that we really need to protect the watershed. That's her answer to every question that we ask about growth and development in the Ring of Fire. So as long as the Liberals are in government, I don't think anything will happen. You'll see lots of promises in a year, the months before the election, but they'll be just as hollow as the promises before the last election and the election before that.
KWG Resources is on the way to China with First Nation. Can you please talk to me about the preparations you're making in advance of that trip?
Well, simple things like going out of my way to meet our Canada's ambassador to China at lunch today. He was the featured speaker at the Canada Club luncheon today. So we compared notes briefly. That was really worth doing. So he understands we're going to be on his agenda when he gets home in a few days. We talked about the trade commissioner there, who is doing a wonderful job of organizing things for us through the embassy, and then the other people, China Rail, First Survey and Design Institute, are going to great lengths to ensure that we get in front of as many of the right people as we can. Right people being those who would be interested in participating in the financing of the construction of the railroad and the railroad and the mine that it serves.
Updates between China and First Nation. What is going on there with regard to business?
This has been a bit of an education for me. The chief of Martin Falls, the chief of Arrowland, and the chief of Webequie have all, I think independently, at least not with too much conversation amongst themselves, come to their own conclusions, which are perhaps substantially more profound than people in Queen's Park or in Ottawa. They have understood that the discovery represents something that is truly historic in its size and its richness. Something that can produce in very large quantities for many, many decades, perhaps certainly a century, and perhaps well into or beyond a second century. And in reflecting on that, they have concluded that the only responsible way to do that is in a way that is most profitable and least costly to the environment. So they, on their own, and these are not trained engineers or anything, or geologists, but they on their own have concluded that it probably should be a large volume underground mining operation. Served by a railroad, which is the least, in both cases, the least impactful thing on the land, which they're very attached to, in a way that we in our culture don't understand. They really are, as people, part of that land that they where they live and that they used to hunt and fish and roam over. So that's really fascinating, and it was that recognition on their part, and the three of them together, that kind of precipitated the conversations that we've had recently, which resulted in the idea that we should create a complete equal partnership for the mining of this chromite over that period of time, and that has sat very well with them and their councils and their communities. And so I'm very hopeful that we're going to make some fast progress. So the China connection is that, as the world knows, we've been to China to engage China Railway to do a bankable feasibility study as a primary due diligence tool for financing. In all likelihood, perhaps complete debt financing by way of a project finance, long-term project finance loan, and they, as businessmen, they understand the leverage implicit in that kind of a construct as well. So they're very anxious to go and look at the feasibility study, meet the people at China Rail, and meet the people that China Rail will introduce them to, and people that our embassy will introduce them to.
By Algoma Manitoulin MPP Michael Mantha. Thanks for joining us, Mr. Mantha.
My pleasure, as always.
So you recently encouraged the Wynne government to reignite the Ring of Fire. What has their response been to that?
Well, do you hear the crickets at the moment? Because that's what we heard in the legislature. It was really a non-response. The frustrating part is there was a lack of acknowledgement in regards to making the Ring of Fire a priority. Many communities across the north, industry, First Nations have been waiting for something, an ignition of this fire in order to get it going forward. However, the government chose to respond to the questions that I had put forward, talking about other mining projects that are going on in this province, which are very important. However, the priority that I was trying to push forward, and which Ontarians and many others are waiting for, is a response from this government as to where does the Ring of Fire sit on the list of priority for this Liberal government.
To you about the Liberal government's response to your recent petition to reignite Ontario's Ring of Fire. What do you think has to happen now, Mr. Mantha, going forward, in order to push this as a priority for the government?
The government needs to make this a priority for themselves. And what I mean by that is they need to move the file forward and direct the individuals that are responsible for this file to actually engage, meaningful engagement with First Nations, with industry, to move it forward. Over the last 3 budgets, which was frustrating for me last week as well, where I didn't see any mention, not one single word for the Ring of Fire or the word Ring of Fire contained within the Ontario Liberal budget, which was frustrating. Sends the wrong signal to industry, sends the wrong signal to many who are looking at the Ring of Fire. What needs to happen is we need to have a focused effort. We need to engage with First Nations. We need to engage with industry. We need to actually sit down, roll up our sleeves, and get the job done. There's a road to be built, and there's possibly rail to be put down. There's avenues, there are discussions, there are tables that we should be sitting down and having discussions with all involved, particularly with First Nations. First Nations are not opposed to development. First Nations want to be involved, they want to be discussed, they want to see transparent and open dialogue. Not after decisions are being made or have been made, they want to be there as a partner as decisions are proceeding, moving this file forward. That's how we're going to move this Ring of Fire forward.
That sounds great. And what are you going to do the next time you're in front of the Wynne government? What are you going to say to them? What are you going to do to continue to reignite this issue?
I'm going to continue what I have been doing for years now, is continuing to listen and engage with First Nations, continuing and listening and engaging with industry, bringing their message forward, pushing this government to really put some type of focus and weight behind the bureaucrats that are sitting there doing very little for the Ring of Fire. And we need to move this file forward. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. We have well over $60 billion, which is the tip of the iceberg, that could bring this type of revenue, economic opportunities for both First Nations and northern communities, for industry. We could be a global player when it comes to chromite mine development, and that is only one of the minerals that are out there. There are still vastly other minerals that are yet to be discovered in the Ring of Fire. So the potential is huge.
What are your most pressing thoughts on the current situation of Ontario's Ring of Fire?
Well, I think it's really about doing it the right way, and getting it the focus on how do we develop the capacity and the condition of the Aboriginal people as we develop the resource. You know, when you look at the history of the province, we've had lots of development, we've had lots of mining activity. We haven't had very much employment or economic opportunities for Indigenous people. And the Ring of Fire, the area north of Highway 11, if you like, the area that goes from Highway 11 to James Bay and Hudson's Bay, is a country that's very precious and very dear to Indigenous people. They feel very strongly about their jurisdiction and their responsibility for the land and the water. And I think it's obviously a challenge, but I think the key thing for the governments and companies and everybody else is to keep your focus on the people who live there. And if we can get that focus back into play, then I think we can get together on a plan. And I think that's really what we're trying to do, is figure out a plan that will allow us to go forward, but a plan that will put the interests of the Indigenous people at the heart of the plan. Not a sideshow, not an afterthought, but at the heart of the plan.
That's nice, an integral part of the plan. And that sort of leads me into my next question for you, which is, what are your sincere hopes for the Ring of Fire?
Well, I'm an optimist. I mean, I've been at this now for 3.5 years, and I think we've made some progress. I mean, I think there's more awareness and knowledge and interest and engagement in the communities than we've ever seen before. My hope is that we will be able to come up with a working plan, and that we will see real benefits for the people who live in the north, the Indigenous people, as well as all the other people who will benefit from it. I mean, the economic benefits will flow throughout the province, and will certainly throughout Northern Ontario. But we're not going to be able to unlock it unless we realize that the doorkeepers are the First Nations, and they are coming at this from a particular point of view and experience that has to be acknowledged and respected. And I think that's something which we're beginning to see, and I think as we see more of that, I think we'll make more progress.
What are you going to do now going forward in 2017 and beyond to advance Ontario's Ring of Fire. As we talked last week, there's not much mention of it in the budget. So what has to be done now?
Well, I can tell you that when our leader, Patrick Brown, was first elected, the very first thing he did was go to the Ring of Fire. That's how important this is. He and I went, it was my 5th trip there at the time. He saw firsthand, with boots on the ground, the potential that is in the Ring of Fire. And so I know that Patrick Brown's priority, once we take office in 2018, will be one of the earliest mandates will be to get into the Ring of Fire and begin finalizing all of the negotiations with the First Nations and the businesses and the government officials to get this thing happening.
What are the potential consequences of the re-emerging partnership here with KWG and First Nation that you can foresee?
That's a brilliant question. One of the things may well be that it becomes much easier to raise money for a partnership that includes an equal partnership between First Nations and the mining company. One of the things we had looked at in the past, and since I think about 2011 is a little more clear as a result of some decisions by the Supreme Court of Canada, is the idea of income earned by First Nations on a reservation being free of, being not subject to Canadian law or Canadian tax. And so in a true partnership of the Ring of Fire mines and railroad, if the headquarters of that enterprise is domiciled in Martin Falls, for example, or in Webequie, it may well be that the income generated there can be tax-free. What that means is that bonds distributed to borrow the money, say $4 billion to build all this stuff, can have a very reasonable price in terms of interest, because the yield is in effect double, because there's no tax on the interest paid in that circumstance. So that's one of the fascinating opportunities. And it looks as though there may well be some appetite for that kind of an investment. It's no secret that figuring out the magic formula to do this business with the First Nations has not been easy. And I think we have a wonderful opportunity in Northern Ontario in the Ring of Fire because of Treaty 9, which was very simply said, we're going to share. We're going to be halvesies. We're going to be equal partners, and the First Nations of the Matawa group of First Nations, tribal council, they wholly support. They are bound. They feel themselves bound and have done for generations by Treaty 9. They felt that we didn't feel that way exactly, but now they're quite enthusiastic about going ahead on that basis.
I love your city. It's beautiful. What do you think about the current situation regarding Ontario's Ring of Fire?
It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for Northern Ontario and the province of Ontario to participate. It is something that we want to see move forward, because for our city, for example, the mining sector is 65 mining companies in the city of North Bay and no mines. We provide all the environmental services, the engineering services, and drill bits and equipment. So this is something that would really spark a lot of growth in our community, create a lot of wealth and a lot of jobs.
That's great to hear.
Morning, Teresa.
Recently, you had an exciting trip to China. Can you tell me some updates from your trip?
Love to. We went directly to Xi'an in the heart of China, which is where the head office of China Rail is, or at least China Rail, the engineering group, FSDI, First Survey Design Institute. The itinerary was very fortunately to be doing business with them, because they're adjacent to the very famous Terracotta Warriors, so that's probably the biggest tourist attraction in the world. But in any event, the first day was formal meetings with China Rail FSDI, an opportunity for the Martin Falls delegation to be educated in a really very well done series of presentations on the findings of the FSDI feasibility study, and their vision as railroad engineers as to what might be possible at a minimum and in fact at a maximum. Really quite astonishing, the kinds of volumes that they think we might be able to mine and transport. And then a lovely formal dinner. There's great Chinese traditions of welcoming people and sending them off with good fortune as well. So the second day we were able to take our party to the Terracotta Warriors, and then the third day we spent the largest part of going by one of the many famous high-speed trains in China from Xi'an to Beijing. And then the following day we spent a large part of the afternoon with the at the Canadian Embassy with the Minister David Murphy and Minister Commercial for Canada in China, and or at the embassy in Beijing, I guess more correctly, and with 3 of his trade commissioners. So we got a very thorough briefing. The chief and his counselors got a very, very thorough briefing from Mr. Murphy, the minister, Canada's minister there, and it substantially helped the understanding. I think you know, you have to see it to believe it, which is true of so many things. But China can't help but make an impression on anyone who goes there for the first time. A very key thing that occurred in the course of the visit was in Xi'an. FSDI had invited the management team from an affiliated company inside the huge China Rail umbrella, which is the foreign investment group of China Rail Construction. And so we've had ongoing conversations with them. They're going to be the key participants in developing our project finance package. So we were able to have follow-up meetings with them in Beijing, and we've had a lot of communication with them subsequently since returning. So there's, you know, it was a long trip, so there's a lot that happened, some of which should stay in China, but in a nutshell, that's what we accomplished.
Excellent. I appreciate the update, Frank, and it sounds like it was quite a productive trip.
It was. Thank you very much.
Thanks for watching Season 1 and Season 2 of The Mining Minute. Do all 9 First Nation communities in Mattawa need to be in agreement for Ontario's Ring of Fire to happen?
There's a legal answer, and there's a political answer, and then there's a social answer. And I think that they're well along with the help of Bob Rae in having all 3 answers amount to the same thing at the same time. But as you know, we've come to understand the history of those communities, and both before the signing of Treaty 9 and after the signing of Treaty 9, and as well as just the, you know, traditional usage amongst the Anishinaabeg and Cree cultures. It's fairly clear that their backyard is their backyard in the case of each First Nation, and there's sharing, but it's sharing. It's legal sharing, really. It is when families from one community marry into a family in an adjoining community, and so you would have overlapping trap lines. So it would be the most typical, and fishing areas, rivers, creeks, and so on. But I think I believe it's almost uniform across Canada. Their hunting grounds, you know, just to take a phrase from the westerns, their hunting grounds are their hunting grounds. So the implication of that in the case of the Ring of Fire is, if there is to be a mine, or more than one mine in the Ring of Fire, there has to be transportation, and it looks as though chromite has an opportunity to be economic. We certainly are spending all of our time and energy to make that so. And chromite is, almost everything that you take away has some value, or in this case, should be taken away because you don't want to leave anything behind to affect the environment. So that means, you're talking millions of tons, and that means a railroad. So this railroad is going to cross the traditional territories of 3 First Nations in all likelihood. In small part, the hunting grounds, if you will, of Arrowland and Webequie, but for the largest part of its route, it would cross the traditional territory, the hunting fishing grounds of the Martin Falls First Nation. So that's why we've worked hard at creating a partnership with them, really, which is we got their permission to say recently that we're negotiating the terms of a partnership, and we're working on identifying precedents that have been used elsewhere so that we have some uniformity to this, and that's going to start to happen quite rapidly. I think that amongst themselves, the Matawa is kind of interesting because it is, in jest, tongue-in-cheek, I could call it a disorganized a group of First Nations, but I mean that there's a legal implication of that, and that is that the 9 Matawa First Nations, which were formerly the territory of a regional office of the Indian agent, and that's the only that's the only history they have in common. That they used to report, or the one guy from Ottawa was the same for the 9 of them. So they've not created any formal structure other than a Council of Chiefs, and the Council of Chiefs meet on a regular basis. There is some structure to how they convene, but beyond that, there's no, unlike others of their neighbors, there's no constitution of a tribal council or of a there's no elected. Their neighbors in Mushkegowuk, the coastal Cree people, that's quite different. They actually elect a Grand Chief, and they have they are a legally formulated tribal council. But in the case of Matawa, that's not the case. So the challenge, and they were brilliant in perhaps selecting someone like former Premier of Ontario, Bob Rae, to help them do this, is to come to terms with the absence of structure and formality, and yet have create a situation where they could feel fairly dealt with on an individual community basis 9 times as development ensued. And so Rae, in negotiating with the province, the province's Justice Yakabuchi, for this purpose, came up with the framework agreement concept, and within the framework agreement, all these tables that deal with issues that are relevant and important to the Matawa, to each of the 9. So that's a very long answer to a short question, but it is so you can see why you could say yes, no, or maybe to an answer to something like that.
Very promising news with the partnership with First Nations and KWG Resources. Can you expand on that for me?
We were able to announce recently that the Martin Falls First Nation, first through the gate, has agreed to negotiate the terms, formal terms of a partnership agreement with us. And as I may have said before, we're busy looking to not reinvent the wheel in doing this. We're going to see if we can use a form of a limited partnership agreement which has been used elsewhere in the province so that there's some uniformity to this kind of process. I think we'll see much more of this, and from the business perspective, the actual business model is very straightforward. Money is going to have its price, and then once money extracts its price, the partners figure out what they're sharing. In our case, and that's called a limited partnership agreement. So you deal with the money, and the money typically requires that you have a formulation of management as well, and a cost of management. So that's what the money wants, that the money will get what it wants. Then the partnership of what's left over, in our case, we decided quite some time ago that Treaty 9 is the Bible in this case, and it said we're going to share what we find up here. The people that we discovered here, are going to continue to live the way you always have. We're going to be doing other things, and you're okay with that. And the deal was that whatever else we find up here, if we find something of value, is going to be 50-50. So our proposal is that it be 50-50.
It's a very important answer, and it's always detailed, so I appreciate your time today, Frank. We're
Thank
well
you.
underway with Season 2 of the Mining Minute. Make sure you check out episodes 1 through 8. In Episode 8, Season 2, we invited viewers to send in their questions. Now we're here to answer them. I'm here with somebody very special this week, Silke Wu. She's the Vice President of Corporate Development at KWG Resources. Welcome to the Mining Minute, Silke.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
Question for you this week is, how will business ties strengthen between Canada and China throughout this partnership for the Ring of Fire?
Well, I believe there's going to be a win-win situation for both countries. Like Canada is have a reserve of chromite, and China is a big steel maker in the whole world. And through this collaboration, and China got a century supply of chromite, which is the ingredient for making stainless steel. And for Canada, through this collaboration, they can help with the First Nations youth employment and boost Canada's economy.
Thanks, Silke. I've got one more question for you this week. KWG Resources is about to embark on a trip to China. Who will they be meeting while they're in China?
For good collaboration, I think they need both government engagement or industries engagement. So we're going to meet with the Chinese government as well, steel maker in China.
Thanks for that, Silke. That's very exciting news for KWG Resources, Canadians, and China as well. But I want to reach out to our Mandarin viewers as well. Can you please answer in Mandarin this week?
Definitely.
Okay. How will the Ring of Fire strengthen business between Canada and China?
这是一个双赢的模式。中国是钢铁大国，加拿大的有1个世纪的铬的储量。通过双赢的合作，加拿大呢可以促进加拿大的经济的发展。对于中国来讲，可以有1个世纪的铬的。
Silke, who will KWG Resources be meeting on this exciting upcoming trip to China?
希望是这是双边政府之间的合作，所以我们希望能够有希望和政府之间的交谈，同时呢，我们希望工业界的介入。
KWG Resources is in a position where you have to pay for the FSDI feasibility study for the railway.
Right.
So have you worked out a payment plan or how this is going to be paid for right now?
We have indeed. It's actually a very, very timely question, fresh news. Just a few days ago, we worked out payment terms with FSDI with the assistance of China Rail Construction. And so they will be able to deliver the feasibility study to China Rail Construction to start the process of, with I think the China Export Development Bank, of discussing the project finance terms in outline, in general term. and then some of the details that need our attention next. The principal one being the offtake agreements, and perhaps in a bigger picture, a marketing arrangement with one of the state-owned enterprises, one or two of the state-owned enterprises.
Excellent. That's very promising news, Frank.
It is.
Thanks for watching the Mining Minute. Tune in again for the next episode.